The glass sweated in his hand, condensation sliding over his knuckles as the waitress reached across the white linen and replaced it without a word. Not refilled. Replaced, her wrist shook once before she withdrew. Across the dining room, the security lights dimmed a fraction as the automated privacy screens calibrated to his biometric signature. The pianist never missed a note. Elias Mercer stared at the new glass, then at the old one now inches away, and felt the room tighten around him. He didn't ask why. The system had trained him not to. He lifted the second glass because the dinner schedule demanded motion, because the board members watched him from behind their smiles, because the reservation algorithm would log any deviation as stress. The waitress was already moving on, shoulders squared, head down, the kind of posture you learned when cameras followed your spine. Elias caught a glimpse of her name stitched crooked on her apron. Lina? And then she was gone into the kitchen's blue light. The first sip burned colder than it should have. He set the glass down carefully, the way you did when you were pretending not to notice something. The original glass sat untouched, the ice melting faster now, a thin crack running through one cube like a fault line. His personal risk monitor, embedded behind his left ear, hummed once and went silent. No alert. No warning. Across from him, a senator laughed too loudly at something Elias hadn't heard. Elias nodded at the right time. The pianist shifted to a minor key. He felt the delayed tremor in his hand and folded it beneath the table. After dessert, after the applause, after the signatures on the philanthropic pledge that would make tomorrow's headlines, Elias stood to leave. His chief of security murmured that the car was ready. The dining room exhaled. In the hallway, away from the sensors calibrated for elegance, his vision narrowed and the floor tilted. He woke on a gurney under white light, a ceiling grid scrolling data he couldn't read. A physician's mouth moved. The risk monitor screamed now, too late to be useful. Elias tasted metal and thought of the untouched glass. They told him it was a reaction, a rare contaminant in the imported ice. They told him the filtration system would be audited. They told him the waitress had followed protocol. He told them he didn't remember her face. The incident report populated itself before he was fully conscious. Elias watched the words assemble on the glass wall as if they belonged to someone else. Tiem ofevient, loftion, no maliciositd, prob biliti aftarda paisano ciuno 3%. He scrolled with a finger that wouldn't stop shaking. Do you want to flag it? His chief of security asked, neutral tone. The question carried weight. Flags triggered inquiries. Inquiries rippled outward. Restaurants lost contracts. Workers lost jobs. The system preferred clean lines. Elias thought of Lina's wrist, the tremor she hadn't masked. He thought of the way she hadn't met his eyes. He thought of the glass sweating into the cloth. No, he said. It's nothing. The system accepted this. The report sealed. The narrative stabilized. By morning, the story was a footnote, buried under a headline about his donation to the Coastal Resilience Fund. Elias watched the news feed while a nurse adjusted his IV. The anchor's voice smoothed over the night. A brief health scare. He smiled on cue when the camera drone drifted past the hospital window. He was good at this. He had been good at this for a long time. He discharged himself early because delays suggested weakness. In the car, the city slid by in filtered clarity, augmented overlays highlighting properties he owned, projects he'd seeded. His phone chimed with congratulations. His phone did not mention a waitress. At home, Elias poured himself water from the tap and let it run too long. He lined up 2 glasses on the counter and filled both. The second one he slid an inch to the left, then stopped. The kitchen lights adjusted. The risk monitor hummed, then went quiet. He slept poorly. When he closed his eyes, he saw ice cracking. The next day, his calendar returned to him with insistence. There were panels to attend, deals to close, a deposition he'd been advised to delay indefinitely. His legal counsel reminded him gently that unpredictability unsettled markets. Elias nodded. He signed. He agreed. He did not ask about the restaurant. At lunch, he chose a different place. The menu arrived on a tablet. The server, a man this time, set down his drink and moved away. Elias watched the glass until the server was out of sight, then pushed it aside and drank from the bottle he'd brought himself. The risk monitor pulsed in approval. That evening, he requested the full footage from the gala, citing a desire to thank staff personally. The request stalled in a queue. Compliance flagged the phrase personally. He rephrased. The footage arrived with faces blurred by default. He watched himself lift the second glass. He watched the waitress's hand enter the frame, the decisive exchange. He watched her face dissolve into pixels. He paused the video and zoomed. The blur resisted. Privacy protocols were aggressive below a certain income threshold. Elias increased authorization. The system asked for justification. He typed EQOIEASSURAMCE. The blur sharpened a fraction. Enough to see the set of her mouth. Enough to see fear restrained into professionalism. Enough to see that she hadn't looked at him when she switched the glass. Elias closed the footage. His phone buzzed with a reminder about a charity dinner the following week. Same caterer. Same venue. The system liked consistency. He imagined standing up at the table, calling the room to attention, asking a waitress why she'd switched his glass. He imagined the cascade of consequences. Investigations. Algorithms recalibrated. Workers flagged. He imagined his name attached to chaos instead of stability. He did nothing. That night, he dreamed of 2 glasses sweating into white cloth. In the dream, he reached for one and his hand passed through it. He woke with his heart hammering and the risk monitor silent. By morning, the silence had settled into him. He dressed, he went to work. The system hummed along, satisfied. Somewhere, a waitress finished her shift and washed her hands until the skin burned. By the time the restaurant reopened, the incident had already been translated into procedure. Elias returned a week later because his calendar said he should. The same entrance recognized him. The same privacy screens dimmed in deference. The same Mac Tray D smiled with the relief of a system confirming its own continuity. The hostess did not mention the ambulance. The pianist did not alter his tempo. The table was the same one, flagged as optimal for donors with cardiovascular risk. Elias sat and folded his hands. He noticed the way his fingers aligned without conscious thought. Training ran deeper than memory. The water arrived in a sealed bottle now, a small adjustment logged somewhere in a risk mitigation ledger. He unscrewed the cap and drank, watching the room reflect itself in the polished glassware. He scanned faces with a habit he told himself was curiosity. He did not see Lena. He asked the Mac Tree D casually whether the staff rotation had changed. The man consulted his wrist display and said turnover was normal. Normal covered a wide range of outcomes. Normal did not require elaboration. The dinner proceeded with the efficiency of a well-oiled narrative. Courses arrived on time. Applause landed where it should. Elias listened to a non-profit director describe the resilience of communities with the calm of someone reading from an approved vocabulary list. The system rewarded him with low stress indicators. Between courses, a compliance officer from his own company leaned in and murmured that the gala footage request had raised a minor flag. "Nothing serious," she said. "Just making sure everything aligns." "Off course," Elias said. He did not ask whose alignment mattered. After dessert, he excused himself and walked the corridor toward the kitchen under the pretense of thanking the chef. The hallway was narrower here, the lighting harsher, the air thick with steam and the clatter of unseen labor. Cameras followed him, but less smoothly. He paused at a door marked STAFONLY. His badge unlocked it with a soft click. The kitchen hummed with controlled chaos. Orders flashed on screens. Hands moved. No one looked up until a supervisor noticed him and stiffened. Introductions happened quickly, names exchanged like passwords. Elias nodded, smiled, said the right things about excellence and teamwork. He scanned faces. Lena was there, at the far end, plating desserts with precise movements. Her hair was pulled back tighter than he remembered. She did not look up when he entered. She did not look up when he spoke. He drifted closer under the guise of curiosity. When he was within arm's reach, she flinched. Not away, but inward, a tightening that passed quickly. Her hands did not shake now. The discipline was visible. "Everything going well?" Elias asked the room. A chorus of affirmations answered. Lena said nothing. He wanted to ask her about the glass. He wanted to say thank you in a way that would pierce the procedural haze. He wanted to acknowledge that something had happened that the system had decided not to see. Instead, he said, "Excellent work," and let the supervisor usher him back toward the dining room. Later, alone in his car, Elias replayed the moment. The flinch, the silence. He felt the familiar itch to intervene, to optimize. He could pull her employment record. He could flag her for commendation, a token recognition that would ripple into her profile, improving her metrics. He could also trigger scrutiny. Attention was not neutral. He chose to do nothing. Again, the next morning, his feed surfaced a small article buried beneath market updates. A server at a downtown restaurant had been terminated for procedural noncompliance. No names, no details. Elias read it twice and closed it. He told himself it could be anyone. At work, he chaired a meeting about Sentinel, the predictive risk platform his company licensed to municipal clients. Charts bloomed on the wall, mapping probabilities over populations. The language was clean: efficiency, safety, prevention. Elias approved an update that would weight anomalies in service environments more heavily. A minor tweak. The system would catch deviations earlier. Good call, his CTO said. Fewer surprises. That afternoon, Elias received a notification Sentinel had flagged an irregularity at a partner venue. A server had intervened in a high-profile dining experience without authorization. The system recommended retraining or removal to preserve brand integrity. Elias stared at the alert. He recognized the phrasing. He had signed off on it. He dismissed the notification. The system logged his decision and adjusted its confidence. At home, Elias poured water and watched it fill the glass. He drank without tasting. He slept poorly. Days passed. The story of the gala faded. The system absorbed the anomaly and smoothed it into noise. Elias attended another dinner, then another. He watched servers with a heightened awareness he pretended was nothing. He noticed how often hands hesitated over glasses, how often eyes flicked to cameras. He began to see patterns in the data he approved. Sentinel flagged more service workers now. Deviations were up. Interventions were down. The platform learned quickly. It always did. In a quarterly review, a municipal partner praised Sentinel for reducing incidents in public-facing venues. "People are sticking to protocol," she said. "It's safer for everyone." Elias nodded. The risk monitor hummed. One evening, scrolling aimlessly, Elias found himself on an internal forum he rarely visited. A thread had been locked, but catch comments remained. Workers discussing unwritten rules. Stories of glasses switched, plates redirected, small acts that prevented larger harms. Stories of people who'd learned when to break protocol and how to disappear afterward. Elias read until his eyes burned. He closed the tab and stared at his reflection in the darkened screen. He thought of Lena's flinch. He thought of the alert he'd dismissed. He thought of the system he'd built and fed and praised. The next morning, he instructed his assistant to schedule a meeting with Sentinel's Ethics Review Board. The request bounced back with a suggested delay. The calendar filled itself with more urgent items. Markets were volatile, there were priorities. At lunch, a server set down his drink. Elias watched the hand withdraw. He did not touch the glass. The waitress, someone new, met his eyes for a fraction of a second. There was a question there. Or maybe he imagined it. She moved on. Elias sat with the untouched drink and felt the weight of his own stillness. The system did not care. The system recorded compliance. Elias began to notice the repetitions not because they announced themselves, but because they hid behind different faces. It started with a conference in Phoenix, a resort calibrated for discretion. The air was too dry, the smiles too practiced. A server brushed past him and replaced his wine before he'd finished the first glass. The movement was fluid, almost elegant. Elias froze with the stem halfway to his lips. The server was already gone, absorbed into the choreography of service. His risk monitor remained silent. He didn't drink either glass. Later that night, alone on the balcony, Elias pulled up Sentinel's live dashboards. He filtered by service, sector anomalies. The map pulsed with soft points of attention. Small deviations corrected quickly. He zoomed in. Patterns emerged when you stopped pretending they were random. Certain venues. Certain times, certain workers flagged and removed with bureaucratic efficiency. He told himself this was correlation, not causation. The system loved that distinction. On the flight home, he sat beside a man who introduced himself as Reverend Cole, a consultant for community ethics integration. The man spoke softly, as if volume itself were a liability. They chatted politely until turbulence rattled the cabin, and the flight attendant paused with a tray of drinks. The attendant hesitated, just a second too long. Then she set Elias's drink down and moved on. Reverend Cole watched her go. "You see it too?" he said, not asking. "See what?" Elias replied. "The pauses?" Cole said. "The spaces where people decide whether to be human or compliant." Elias looked out the window. The desert stretched below. Indifferent. Cole continued, conversational. "I work with people who believe the system protects them. It does, in a way. Until it doesn't. Until someone learns the rules well enough to bend them." "Are you saying the system is wrong?" Elias asked. "I'm saying it's very good at surviving," Cole said. "It adapts. It absorbs resistance and calls it improvement." When the drinks arrived again, untouched, Elias pushed his away. Cole noticed and smiled faintly, as if Elias had passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. After landing, Elias's phone filled with alerts. A municipal client had experienced service disruption. A server had been detained after deviating from protocol during a private event. No harm reported. Situation resolved. Elias closed the alert and kept walking. Back in New York, he began to see echoes everywhere. A driver who took an unexpected route and was later deactivated by the platform. A nurse who adjusted a dosage without authorization and disappeared from the roster. Small acts erased. The system tightened its language around them, calling it optimization. He scheduled another meeting with the ethics board. This time it stuck. The board met in a glass-walled room that overlooked the city. As if transparency could be architectural, they listened while Elias spoke about edge cases and human judgment. They nodded. They used words like balance and scalability. "Our mandate is harm reduction," the chair said. "Individual discretion introduces variance. Variance saves lives," Elias said before he could stop himself. A pause. Data scrolled on the wall behind them, a silent counterargument. "We can't build for exceptions," the chair replied. "We build for patterns." Elias left the meeting with a familiar sense of having spoken and changed nothing. The system had registered his concern as noise. That evening, he returned to the internal forum. More threads had been locked. He found an archived post from a user named Glasshift. The writing was careful, coded. Stories of workers learning to read subtle signals, of guests who knew when not to drink, of consequences that followed anyway. Elias sent a message through an anonymous channel. "Just one line I noticed. The reply came hours later, we know." They exchanged fragments over days. No names, no places, just confirmations that the patterns Elias saw were real. That workers had quietly intervened for years, long before Sentinel. That the system had begun to notice not the harms prevented, but the rules broken. Why keep doing it? Elias typed one night. "Because sometimes it works," came the reply, "and because stopping feels worse." Elias stared at the words until his screen dimmed. He thought of Lena again, not as an individual, but as a node in a network of quiet defiance. He wondered how many times the system had failed because someone had acted without permission, and how many times it had succeeded because someone like him had looked away. At another dinner, another city, a waiter leaned close as he poured water. "Don't," he murmured, barely audible. Elias's heart stuttered. The waiter straightened and walked on. Elias did not drink. Later, he checked Sentinel. The venue had been flagged for retraining. He watched the confidence metrics adjust upward. The Reverend Cole resurfaced in his life through an invitation to a panel on ethical automation. On stage, under hot lights, they spoke in measured tones about accountability. In the audience, Elias caught the eyes of service workers stationed along the walls. Some looked away quickly. Some held his gaze unreadable. After the panel, Cole approached him. "You're closer than you think," he said. "But closeness isn't the same as crossing." "Crossing what?" Elias asked. "The line where your comfort stops being the priority," Cole said. "The line where the system stops protecting you." That night, Elias received a confidential report he hadn't requested. A statistical analysis of unexplained risk mitigations over the past decade. Incidents where harm probabilities dropped without system intervention. The author was redacted. The conclusion was understated. Human deviation had accounted for a significant portion of unmodeled safety outcomes. Elias read the report twice, then a third time. He understood then that the waitress switching his glass had not been an anomaly. It had been part of an informal, invisible safety net woven by people with no authority and everything to lose. Annette Sentinel was now tearing apart thread by thread. The realization did not bring relief. It brought weight. Because Elias also understood his role. The system had not acted alone. It had learned from his approvals, his silences, his preference for order over disturbance. He had taught it what to value. His phone buzzed with a priority alert. Sentinel had detected a coordinated pattern of service deviations. The recommendation was clear: escalate. Reset protocols. Make an example. Elias set the phone face down on the table and sat in the quiet of his apartment. Outside, the city pulsed, indifferent to his hesitation. He knew now what the waitress had done. He knew why. And he knew what it would cost to acknowledge it. The report stayed open on Elias's screen long after midnight, its understated language pressing harder than any accusation. Human deviation accounted for unmodeled safety outcomes. The phrasing was careful, almost apologetic, as if the data itself knew it was trespassing. Elias read it again, slower this time, and saw the gaps the author had left for a reader willing to fill them. The dips in projected harm. The absences where incidents should have been. The negative space shaped like hands intervening and then withdrawing. He thought back to the gala and felt the memory realign. The waitress switching his glass had not been an instinctive act of kindness. It had been recognition. Training of a different kind. She had read the room the way Sentinel read data, but with stakes the system didn't acknowledge. She had acted inside a pattern Elias had helped erase. The realization did not come with clarity. It came with obligation. The next day, he asked for a private audit of Sentinel's historical training sets. The request triggered a cascade of permissions. Compliance flagged it as unusual. Elias overrode the flag with a justification that felt thin even as he typed it. Stirdi RVW. The data arrived in fragments. Early versions of Sentinel had been messier, less confident. They had learned from human overrides, drivers rerouting, nurses adjusting, servers intervening. Each override had been logged as noise, then gradually weighted down as the system matured. Elias saw his own fingerprints everywhere, decisions to streamline, to reduce variance, to trust the algorithm's growing certainty. In one early log, a note caught his eye. Unmodeled mitigation service worker intervention. The line had been annotated years ago with a suggestion: investigate further. The suggestion had been closed without action. Elias checked the timestamp. He'd been in the room that day arguing for focus. He closed the file and sat back. The office lights adjusted to his posture. The risk monitor hummed approval. At lunch, he met with his legal counsel, a woman who spoke in margins and contingencies. He asked, hypothetically, about liability if a system discouraged human intervention that could prevent harm. She listened, expression neutral. Hypothetically, she said, responsibility diffuses. That's the advantage of distributed decision-making. No single point of failure. And no single point of accountability, Elias said. She smiled slightly. That's one way to put it. That afternoon, a message arrived through the anonymous channel. Glass shift again. They had seen the escalation alert. They knew what it meant. People were already being questioned. Retraining sessions scheduled. Metrics adjusted to discourage hesitation. Can you stop it? The message asked. Elias stared at the words. He could, in a way. He could delay. He could request more data. He could soften the language. He could also expose the pattern, name it. Force the system to confront what it had been erasing. That would not be a tweak. That would be a rupture. What happens if I don't? He typed. It gets quieter, came the reply. And then it happens anyway. That evening, Elias returned to the restaurant alone. No entourage. No announcement. He sat at the bar and ordered water. The bartender set down a glass. Elias watched the ice settle. He did not drink. Can I help you? The bartender asked after a while. I'm looking for someone, Elias said. He said her name carefully. The bartender's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She doesn't work here anymore? Why? Elias asked. A pause. Policy, the bartender said. The word carried the weight of a closed door. Elias left a generous tip and walked out into the night. The city smelled like rain and exhaust. He felt exposed without the buffer of his car and walked until the feeling dulled. At home, he drafted a memo he did not send. In it, he described the invisible network of human interventions, the lives saved without acknowledgement, the cost of erasing discretion. He wrote plainly, without jargon. He deleted it. He drafted another, this one framed as a risk analysis. He cited the report. He suggested a pilot program to reintroduce controlled human discretion. He imagined the board's reaction. He imagined headlines. He deleted it too. The system preferred decisiveness. Elias felt the pressure to choose a narrative it could absorb. The escalation alert returned, more insistent. Sentinel recommended immediate action to prevent coordinated noncompliance. The language was sharper now. The confidence metrics glowed green. Elias requested a meeting with the board. Emergency this time. They gathered reluctantly, faces framed by screens. He spoke without slides. "There's a layer we've been stripping away," he said. "Human judgment that doesn't announce itself. It's been preventing harm." The chair listened, fingers steepled. "We've discussed variance." "This isn't variance," Elias said. "It's a parallel system, informal, uncredited. And we're dismantling it." Silence. Data flickered behind them. "You're suggesting we legitimize rule breaking," someone said. "I'm suggesting we acknowledge reality," Elias replied. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. The chair leaned back. "And if we don't, then people like the waitress who saved my life will keep paying for it," Elias said. He did not plan to say it. The words hung in the air, heavier than he'd expected. Eyes shifted. The chair's expression tightened. "That's a serious claim." "It's a true one," Elias said. He felt the floor tilt just slightly. The risk monitor screamed, then went quiet. The meeting ended without resolution. A task force was proposed. Language was softened. The escalation was delayed by 48 hours. In the hallway afterward, the compliance officer caught up to him. "You should be careful," she said softly. "You're blurring lines." Elias nodded. He felt strangely calm. The line had been there all along. That night, he dreamed of 2 glasses again. This time, when he reached for one, it shattered in his hand. He woke with cuts on his palm where his nails had dug in. By morning, the city buzzed with a minor story. A data leak framed as a security breach. Fragments of Sentinel's internal discussions were circulating. The report. The early logs. The phrase human deviation trended briefly before being smoothed into ambiguity. Elias's phone rang. The chair's name lit the screen. "You crossed a line," she said without preamble. "The system can't tolerate this kind of uncertainty." Elias looked at the glass of water on his desk. Untouched. "The system already does," he said. "It just doesn't admit it." The call ended. The escalation alert pulsed again, brighter now. Elias understood that whatever he did next would not be absorbed quietly. Somewhere, a server hesitated over a glass, watching a camera blink. The moral trap did not announce itself as a choice. It arrived as a deadline. 48 hours expired into a Monday morning thick with rain and muted sirens. Elias sat in his office while the city blurred beyond the glass, the escalation alert pulsing steadily in his peripheral vision. Sentinel's recommendation had hardened overnight. Language sharpened. Confidence metrics rose. The system was ready to act, and it needed his authorization to do so at scale. The board had framed it cleanly in their final memo. Coordinated noncompliance posed a reputational risk. Allowing it to persist would undermine public trust in automated safety. A decisive response would reassure partners and stabilize markets. The human cost was reduced to a footnote, phrased as temporary disruption. Elias read the memo once, then again. Each time, the same conclusion surfaced. Approve the escalation, and the system would purge the informal network quietly and efficiently. Do nothing, and Sentinel would continue tightening anyway, slower but just as thorough, with the added benefit of Elias's plausible deniability. Intervene publicly, and the system, and the institutions bound to it, would turn on him. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered without greeting. "They're starting early," a voice said. "Reverend Cole, interviews." Detentions framed as retraining. People are scared. Elias closed his eyes. I delayed it. You delayed the paperwork? Cole replied. Not the momentum. Another buzz. A message through the anonymous channel. Glass shift again, shorter this time. They took Mara this morning. Who is Mara? Elias typed. Someone who switched glasses better than most, came the reply. Elias felt the room narrow. The abstract had acquired a name he hadn't known yesterday and would never see in an official report. He stood and walked to the window. Below, a line of delivery vehicles idled, their routes optimized to the minute. He imagined the waitress, Mara, being escorted into a room with neutral walls and cameras that didn't blink. He imagined questions framed as concern. He imagined the permanent mark added to her profile. Elias could stop this one detention. He could make a call, pull a string, cite executive privilege. One person would walk free. The system would note the override and compensate elsewhere. Others would be taken instead, quietly. The pattern would hold. Or he could sign the authorization, let Sentinel execute the purge cleanly, and preserve the illusion of order. The network would collapse. Future interventions would be rarer. Harm would rise in ways the system would not count. Or he could go public. Name the hidden layer. Admit his complicity. Force a reckoning that would not spare him. Contracts would be frozen. Sentinel would be suspended pending review. Municipal clients would scramble. In the gap, the system's protections would falter. People would get hurt in ways that would be traced back to the disruption. His disruption. The options arranged themselves into a shape with no clean edge. His assistant knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission. The board is asking for your decision, she said. Her voice was steady, professional. Her eyes flicked to the pulsing alert and away again. Give me 10 minutes, Elias said. She hesitated. They're emphasizing urgency? I know, Elias said. She left. Elias sat back down and opened a secure channel to Sentinel's core interface. The authorization waited, a simple gesture away. He hovered his finger and felt the old obedience rise, the relief of letting the system decide. He had built his life on that relief. His phone buzzed again. A photo this time sent through the anonymous channel. A hand palm up, faint scars crossing it. A glass in the background blurred. No face, no context. Just evidence of a life intersecting danger quietly. Elias thought of his own hand, the phantom sting from his dream. He thought of the gala, the glass sweating into cloth, the waitress's wrist steadying as she acted. He thought of the system he'd fed and praised and allowed to learn what mattered. He opened a new document and began to write, not a memo this time, but a statement. He named the pattern without naming individuals. He cited the report. He acknowledged his role. He sent it to a journalist he knew would publish it without smoothing the edges. Then he signed the authorization. The system accepted both inputs without hesitation. Sentinel executed the escalation with ruthless efficiency. Simultaneously, the story broke. Within hours, feeds filled with fragments, human deviation, invisible labor, lives saved without credit. Elias Mercer named as both architect and whistleblower. Markets wobbled. Municipal clients issued statements of concern. Sentinel's interface lit up with error states it had not been designed to explain. Elias watched alerts stack and felt a strange stillness settle in him. He had chosen to sacrifice the network to expose it. He had ensured harm now to prevent harm later, or told himself that was what he'd done. The calculus felt thin even as it hardened into fact. His legal counsel called, voice tight. You've created significant exposure? I know, Elias said. They're talking about removing you, she said, immediately. I know, he repeated. Outside, sirens threaded through the city, louder now. Elias imagined workers being escorted out, badges deactivated, profiles marked. He imagined the waitress, Mara, somewhere between fear and resignation. He imagined future dinners where no hand would hesitate over a glass. The board convened an emergency session without him. His access to internal systems flickered, then dimmed. The risk monitor behind his ear went silent. Elias sat alone in his office as the day unraveled. He had not saved the network. He had not spared the innocent. He had only ensured that the truth could not be buried without cost. As evening fell, his assistant returned, eyes red. They voted, she said. "You're out." Elias nodded. He felt lighter and heavier at once. "Thank you," he said and meant it. She hesitated at the door. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked. Elias looked at the authorization still glowing faintly on his screen, at the statement spreading beyond his control. He thought of the glass he never drank from. The one switched in silence. "I don't know," he said. Outside, somewhere, a server set down a glass and watched a guest's hand hover, uncertain. The collapse did not arrive as spectacle. It arrived as process. By morning, Elias's credentials no longer opened doors. The building recognized his face and offered polite refusals. Elevators passed him by. Screens displayed messages about temporary access issues that would never resolve. He collected the contents of his office into a single box under the quiet supervision of security contractors who would not meet his eyes. Outside, reporters waited behind barriers calibrated for crowd control. Questions came in waves, each one framed as an invitation to simplify. Elias said little. He had learned how language could be used to smooth sharp edges, and he refused to provide it now. Silence unsettled them more than outrage would have. At home, his devices updated overnight. Accounts frozen pending review. Travel permissions suspended. A polite email informed him that for his own safety, certain protections would be unavailable. The risk monitor behind his ear remained inert, a piece of hardware without authority. Sentinel did not go offline. That had been naive to imagine. The system fragmented instead, its core licensed, rebranded. Absorbed by partners who issued statements distancing themselves from the controversy while quietly integrating its most effective components. Municipal clients paused deployments publicly and resumed them privately with adjusted thresholds. The network Elias had exposed collapsed, but the system learned from the rupture. Within days, the narrative stabilized. Elias Mercer, disgraced executive, complex issues. Lessons learned. Panels convened, white papers promised. The phrase human deviation receded from feeds, replaced by resilience and safeguards. Elias watched it happen from the quiet of his apartment, his world shrinking to rooms that did not ask him for decisions. He slept in short bursts. When he dreamed, it was of hands moving through air, replacing objects that could not be named. He received a message from GlassShift one last time. It was brief. "It's worse now." He typed a reply and erased it. There were no words left that did not feel like theft. One afternoon, a letter arrived by courier, heavy paper in an unmarked envelope. Inside, a notice of inquiry. Regulatory bodies wanted testimony, not about the network, about governance failures, about his decision-making, about whether he had knowingly undermined public safety. Elias prepared meticulously. He reviewed logs, timelines, his own emails. He practiced answers that told the truth without pretending it was clean. When he sat before the panel days later, the room was smaller than he expected, the questions sharper. Did you authorize an escalation knowing it would result in wrongful detentions? A commissioner asked. I authorized it knowing people would be harmed, Elias said. They already were? Did you leak proprietary information? Another asked. I shared information that belonged to the public, Elias replied. They wrote notes. They exchanged looks. The system absorbed his words and translated them into risk. Afterward, a junior staffer approached him in the hallway. My sister worked service, she said quietly. She used to talk about switching glasses. She paused. Thank you? Elias nodded. The gratitude felt undeserved, like a coat that did not fit. Weeks passed. The inquiry concluded without drama. Findings were mixed. Recommendations issued. Elias was barred from holding executive roles in regulated industries for a period that might as well have been permanent. Fines were assessed and negotiated down. He paid them without comment. He moved through the city anonymously now, a face no longer flagged for deference. He learned the rhythms of public transit. He learned how often people hesitated at crosswalks, even when the signal changed. He learned how much he had not seen before. At a cafe near his apartment, he became a regular. He ordered water and drank it without ceremony. The barista was a young man with careful eyes. One morning, as Elias reached for his glass, the barista's hand moved almost imperceptibly, nudging it aside and setting down another. Elias froze. The barista did not look at him. He continued wiping the counter as if nothing had happened. Elias's heart thudded in his chest. He stared at the two glasses, identical, unremarkable. He did not ask why. He drank from the second. Nothing happened. No alarms, no sirens. Just the taste of water and the hum of conversation around him. Elias felt his hands shake and wrapped them around the glass until they steadied. When he looked up, the barista met his eyes briefly. There was no recognition there, no gratitude. Just a shared understanding that this was how some people moved through the world now. Elias left a tip he could afford and walked out into the gray morning. The city moved around him, indifferent and alive. He thought of Lena, of Mara, of the countless names he would never know. The system had survived, it always would. It had shed a layer and grown a thicker skin. Somewhere, a new version of Sentinel learned to model hesitation as risk. Elias lived with the cost. His identity had been stripped down to actions he could no longer hide behind authority. He no longer believed in clean choices. He believed in weight. That night, at home, he poured himself water and set the glass on the table. He watched condensation form, a familiar pattern. He did not reach for it immediately. He waited, listening to the building settle, to the distant sounds of traffic. No one switched the glass. Elias lifted it anyway. The aftermath did not soften with time. It settled. Months later, Elias lived in a narrower version of the city, one measured in blocks instead of boardrooms. His name still surfaced occasionally, usually attached to cautionary phrases, overreach, recklessness, unintended consequences. He did not correct them. The system did not require his participation anymore. Sentinel's descendants proliferated quietly. New names, new logos, the same logic threaded through them. Municipal contracts resumed under revised language. The panels concluded. The public moved on, guided by narratives that promised safety without friction. Elias read about these developments the way one read obituaries of distant acquaintances. Aware, detached, unable to intervene. He had learned how systems mourned. They issued statements. They incorporated loss into future modeling. They called it resilience. Elias found work that did not ask him to decide for others. Consulting, loosely defined. Advisory roles that required opinions but not authority. He declined most offers. He preferred the quiet anonymity of being unimportant. In the cafe, the barista never switched his glass again. Or maybe Elias simply stopped noticing. He learned to drink without ceremony, without waiting for signals that might never come. Sometimes he left without finishing, the water warming untouched. At night, he replayed the gala in his mind. Not the collapse, not the headlines, but the moment before. The waitress's hand entering the frame. The silent exchange. He wondered how many times that moment had replayed elsewhere, unnoticed, unrecorded. How many lives had continued because someone had acted without permission? He received no further messages from Glasshift. The channel went quiet, then disappeared. Elias assumed the network had dissolved, scattered by fear and fatigue. He did not romanticize it. Resistance, he had learned, was expensive and rarely victorious. One evening, walking home through a neighborhood he hadn't known before, Elias passed a memorial he didn't remember being there. Candles guttered in the wind. A photo taped to a lamppost showed a smiling woman in a service uniform. The caption beneath her name was simple, she noticed. Elias stopped. He did not know if this was Mara, or Lena, or someone else entirely. It did not matter. The words did their work without specificity. A passerby paused beside him. "You know her?" the man asked. "No," Elias said. The man nodded and moved on. Elias stood there longer than was comfortable, until the candles burned low and the street resumed its rhythm. He walked home with the image fixed behind his eyes. The system survived in a modified form, as systems always did. It absorbed the lesson that exposure carried risk and adjusted accordingly. Human hesitation became a variable to suppress earlier, more gently, wrapped in language about empowerment and choice. Training modules were updated. The hands still moved, but less often, and with greater fear. Elias understood now that the waitress had not saved his life because she was brave. She had saved it because she recognized a moment the system could not. She had acted not in defiance, but in alignment with a different ledger of value, one that did not scale. He understood, too, that by surviving, he had become part of the cost. His life continued where others had been narrowed, redirected, erased. That asymmetry did not resolve with insight. On the anniversary of the gala, a minor story surfaced and vanished within hours. A donor hospitalized. A rare reaction, no malicious act detected. The venue issued an apology. Elias read it and closed the feed. That night, he set 2 glasses on his table without thinking. He filled one, then the other. He stared at them, identical in shape and promise. The room was quiet. No cameras calibrated to him now. No risk monitor hummed. He waited. Nothing happened. Elias chose one at random and drank. The water was cool, ordinary. He set the glass down and left the other untouched. In the silence, the title of the story he would never tell him finally resolved itself, not as a miracle, not as heroism, but as a record of a moment when a life had depended on an action that could not be acknowledged without breaking the machinery around it. The waitress switched his glass in silence. The billionaire watched, realizing she'd saved his life. And the system learned to make sure it would not happen again. Elias lived with that knowledge, carried it into rooms where no one recognized him, into choices that no longer pretended to be clean. The weight did not lessen. It simply became part of how he moved through the world. When he turned out the light, the darkness did not offer relief. It offered continuity. And somewhere, even now, a hand hovered over a glass, deciding whether the cost was worth it. If this story stayed with you, thank you for remaining until the end. If you choose to support the channel by liking, subscribing, or sharing, it helps make space for more stories like this. And if you return, there will be others waiting, shaped by the same questions we never quite escape.